After living in Portugal for 5 years now, we think it's a good idea to pause life, reflect on all that's happened in terms of the good and the bad, and let you know what we're going to do next.
And if you're new here to the channel, my name is Josh.
And I'm Kalie.
And we're from the United States, but we've been living outside of the US since 2009. All right, except for a couple of short periods where we moved from one foreign country to the next and we had to be back in the US.
We've been creating content on this channel since 2015 when we lived in Saudi Arabia, and we were doing it part-time until about 2020 when a whirlwind of changes forced us to make the push to becoming full-time content creators.
That's right, and to understand where we are now after 5 years of living in Portugal, we need a quick breakdown of where we started and how things evolved.
In 2020, we moved to magical Porto, Portugal, and started life with our 9-month-old daughter. This time was marked by learning how to be parents and navigating a new country that had ever-changing policies due to COVID-19 restrictions, which impacted the country and the world greatly during this time of immigration.
Yeah, and at the beginning of 2021, heavy restrictions hit the city, which caused us to be shuttered indoors without much access to the Portuguese language. We simply weren't coming in much contact with anyone, let alone Portuguese people.
Thankfully, in the summer of 2021, we embarked on a huge 90-day adventure where we traveled the country and filmed from south to north just for you, our viewer. We gained a ton of knowledge and understanding of a wide variety of places that you might be interested in. We also acquired quite a following.
In 2022 and 2023, we saw the continued rise of housing, immigration rates, and an influx of bureaucratic changes, which made keeping up even more challenging.
Just as we started to feel more settled in 2024, other challenges hit us, which we'll get into in a second because we're still tackling some of those now.
Yeah, fortunately in 2024, we were able to complete our A2 level of Portuguese via a course that we did, which really gave us a better understanding of the language and the culture. Not to mention that our daughter had been in school for a couple of years and we're starting to make friends with those parents.
Okay, so it's 2025. How have the last 5 years been for us?
All right, so let's start out and talk about the negatives, then we'll go into the positives, and then finally, where there's room for improvement. So first and foremost, housing. So housing prices have absolutely exploded. And if we take a look back to where we started when we moved in 2020, we were already kind of paying over the odds, but everyone was screaming about how those were over the odds. Now people are pulling their hair out.
Right, when we first moved, we wanted to make sure that we had a nice place to live and that it was one, legitimate because we couldn't come here before to take a look at it, and two, that it was at least comfortable, especially with a 9-month-old. So we do know that we paid a bit more of a premium, but that's just something that we felt like we should do, and that then felt actually kind of expensive. But now when we go back and look at that apartment for rent, it's I think doubled at this point, if not more.
Yeah.
And it was a very central place in Porto, a great location, but prices have just gotten really high in Portugal in general for housing.
And we fortunately were able to get a pretty reasonable accommodation as our, let's say, the second property that we lived in, really. And it was the first time that we met our current landlord, and he rented us his place at a very fair rate. And we spent really 3 excellent years there. And then we had the opportunity to move to a new property that he bought. And granted, we are paying much more here now than we were back then. I think overall it was worth it. We started to outgrow the 1-bedroom place that we had. Obviously it's 3 people, and now we're in a 2-bedroom place. But looking on the outside of our apartment and what's going on with the market in general, I mean, I would say in the past 5 years, we've had really a doubling.
Right. I would say this as well. I spoke with someone not long ago who was looking at prices, and they were comparing Lisbon and Miami, and they were finding that there were places in Lisbon that were actually more expensive than Miami, which seems really shocking.
Yes.
So I think that prices for housing have really gotten out of hand for renting and for buying around Portugal. Some of it's a bit of a supply demand. So I think as we see more new buildings being renovated and finished, or complete buildings being done, then we're seeing the market flood a little more with options, which I think will help bring the prices down. But overall, housing prices the past few years have just really risen.
And just yesterday, I was talking to a Portuguese friend that was talking about a property that she has and what some new tax breaks could look like coming through, whereby if she rents her apartment for what is considered a reasonable rent, then she'll get some tax breaks on the income from renting that property. But here's the catch. the reasonable rate would be 2,000 euros.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Which is
that's
really
not,
high.
That's not really reasonable.
That's
right?
not reasonable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would imagine that many of these landlords are going to be able to start, if this legislation passes, they'll be able to start taking advantage of the tax break while probably not having to change the price for their rental.
Yeah. Okay, so moving from housing, another negative I think that we've seen the past few years is how immigration has affected Portugal.
Yeah.
And immigration in general, I think there's been legal immigration and illegal immigration, and we've seen both of them affect in different ways.
One of the biggest ways I see is that there's more unrest, I think, among the Portuguese about what's going on. And you see a rise with Chega, which is the party on the right, and they're gaining popularity. And one of their biggest platforms is talking about immigration.
Right, that's the reason that they're gaining popularity, is because I think there is unrest amongst the Portuguese, and so the Portuguese are going out and voting for them because they want to see a change. Because one big thing I think you can see when you're out on the streets is the crime, that those rates have gone up in the past few years.
Yeah, so that's been a negative, although I'd like to see the statistics on something like that, because I'm not 100% sure that there's a direct correlation. But we do see that, like, Portuguese people on the streets are concerned about it. We hear it when we go, like, for example, when I get my haircut, my barber will talk about like what he and his friends are discussing. So, you know, when we look at it through that lens, immigration has started to impact Portugal in a negative way.
Right. I mean, obviously immigration comes with pros and cons. There was a lot of room for growth for Portugal, and I think that they were welcoming that, but maybe it happened too fast, or they just, legislation wasn't good for how it worked, and so it put a bit of a strain on the Portuguese people.
And on the other side of immigration, if you are trying to get to Portugal, the processes have just been slow. Now, it does appear towards the end of this year, 2025, that they're trying to remedy that with certain policies or certain hirings. They're trying to bulk up the workforce that deals with integrating foreigners into the country, but
they're backed up.
It's not really working, right?
Yeah, they're backed up big time. I would say another big thing that is a negative for us that we've seen firsthand is we've always been very open about how we love Portuguese people and they're very kind. We've always had a really good relationship with them. But a couple of years ago, we bought a house to renovate and we're having a lot of problems with the neighbors. So I think we're seeing the ugly side of Portuguese, I guess you could say, because obviously not everyone is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a bit of Portuguese not being so nice.
No, exactly. And among our Portuguese friends who know the situation, I mean, granted, right, they're hearing our side, and I'm sure that our neighbors, when they tell their friends about like what we're doing, they're probably on their side. But the reality is, we've seen and heard some stories of what other Portuguese people do to their neighbors, and it's not good.
Right, all being Portuguese as well. Our Portuguese friends have said that they've had similar situations to what is happening to us. And it's just kind of nasty, just not very nice, like a characteristic flaws, I would say, that are just not very nice. So seeing that has definitely been a con.
So many people have asked us what's going on with the property that we're developing and like where did the videos go, because we started to talk about it on this channel. Then we created a separate channel called Let's Get Building with Josh and Kalie, and we essentially just stopped putting videos out around this time last year. And why did we do that? It's because our lawyer said, hey, you should probably take this stuff down and just not show the neighbors what's actually happening in the building site. So we did that on his recommendation. We had hoped multiple times that this was going to get resolved outside of court, and now we actually have 2 court cases that are ongoing. The positive thing is that we've still been able to continue with the project. The building's still being developed. We did lose some time because of all of the shenanigans, but it appears that we'll be wrapping up sometime in 2026 with the project.
And we're not the only ones who are in court battles with neighbors who have bought places and the neighbors are causing issues. So it does seem like this is a con. And I think because of these cons, like housing prices, maybe the people, immigration, we're actually seeing friends or people that we know, at least acquaintances, who have been here for years who are now leaving Portugal.
Specifically happening with the younger demographic, I mean, what they're telling us is that they moved here at a time when you couldn't really do much. I mean, like we're talking around COVID, or when remote work was kind of at its peak. So like there's 2 separate things here, right? When there wasn't much to do, they wanted a place to like just chill, and enjoy, and Porto specifically, and Lisbon as well, were amazing cities for that because they weren't overcrowded. I wouldn't say Porto's overcrowded. I do think Lisbon is certainly there, where it's becoming a lot to kind of move around and feel like that city's your home. On the other side of what I was saying with remote work, it seems like remote work is becoming a little more tight with restrictions, and therefore some people are having to either move back or find a different job, which is taking them to a different part of Europe.
Right. I think a common thing that's being said around Portugal is when something happens or doesn't go the way that it should, or it's not efficient, you say, oh, it's just Portugal. That's just how the Portuguese are. And we even have friends who are Portuguese who are like, no, that cannot continue to be an excuse. And so what's happening is people who have moved here, who maybe didn't think I'm going to retire here or this isn't my forever place, now they're like tired of that saying. They're tired of it being not efficient, not working well, and just being like, no, we don't have to say, well, that's Portugal. It's just like this. No one's choosing, the Portuguese are choosing to not, or at least in bulk, make a change. So those people are now like, I'm gonna go somewhere else. And not that going somewhere else, like the grass is always greener on the other side, but you don't have to deal with it. You can just move on, get to the honeymoon stage in another country for a couple of years, and then the same thing will probably happen. But they have the flexibility to do that. So people are leaving Portugal. Yeah,
that's exactly what I was gonna say. I mean, it could just simply be a fresh start for people.
Right.
It's they get to their wits' end, and that's happened to us in a few other countries, namely Spain and South Korea. We just got to our wits' end with certain like cultural things or things that we had to deal with. That it was like, you know what, we don't have to be here any longer. And then we just decided to pick up a work contract elsewhere. Unfortunately for us right now, we love being in Portugal and we really enjoy the rhythm of life, and we can put up with some of the things that others aren't willing to put up with. So another point is that we're starting to see friends get sick and potentially, well, one of them in particular pass away.
Yes, I think now that we've been here for 5 years and people are here a bit more long-term, you start to create those long-term relationships. You do understand that life is fragile, and unfortunately there's been big sicknesses, big things that have happened, whether that's cancer or big accidents, and unfortunately the passing of friends.
All right, but on the bright side, some positives. Our bond with our Portuguese friends just continues to grow.
I think the more that we learn the language as well is helpful. Now, while all of our friends do speak amazing English and it's much easier to communicate in English, learning a bit more about Portuguese, the language and the culture, and getting into the festivals with locals is a lot of fun. And so that bond really does grow because they also are excited to share with us, and they see the excitement that we have.
I think also due to the longevity that we've been here, people are looking at us, our Portuguese friends are looking at us like, oh, you're like here. Like you're not just here today and gone tomorrow. So therefore, like, we're getting invited to annual parties, and we're getting now opened up to their friend group. So that's been really cool to see. And we're getting invited by, friends of friends to do stuff. And that's been really kind of, I don't know, fulfilling to start to have this experience. Because it's taken us a while, right? It's taken us until like year 4, year 5 to do that. It just simply did not happen our first 3 years. Not like this.
And then also when you first come in the first couple of years, I think you're very busy doing not the surfacey festivals, but like the main festivals that are the big ones. And now that we're in year 5, we're doing, of course, those, or maybe we've done those a couple of years. So we're like, okay, what else is like, what are the layers underneath Porto and Portugal in general of like the smaller festivals, but still very big. So for example, is being invited by Portuguese friends to their small town to experience a huge festival that's just their town, but it's such a big type thing for the town, and it's just a lot of fun to experience that rather than in a bigger city or one that makes all the lists online and everything. So getting to see like the layers of like the festivities here now is nice.
Absolutely. And another major positive is that since we've completed 5 years of residency here in Portugal, we have applied for citizenship. So currently the law is 5 years of residency and you can apply for Portuguese citizenship. So we've done that. We made a video about that. We're super excited to wrap that up. It's probably going to take 2 years.
Yeah, we're not wrapping that up anytime soon. So you'll see our 6-year and 7-year maybe video by the time that wraps up. We'll see.
Yeah, but I think last year when we made this video, I talked about the deepening of connections that we have with Portugal. And as I've done a ton of research on what it would be like to migrate to different parts of Europe, I just keep looking at Portugal as being like the only place really that I would want to have a second citizenship. Like there's something about this country where when I look at even just like the name of other countries, I'm looking at you, France. I just look at Portugal, it's like I'd rather like be Portuguese, be known to be Portuguese and have that nationality or citizenship than I would, it's like French or another nationality, I don't know.
Okay, so we have the positives, the negatives, and then what about room for growth?
Well, I definitely think one room for growth is that we really need to dedicate more time to practicing Portuguese. So in 2024, when we did the language course, as I was talking about earlier, we actually had to like block out in our time schedule 2 hours a day to get that done. It was an online course where we would like log in remotely and meet in a small group with a teacher. And since completing that course and being like certified at the A2 level, we really haven't dedicated specific time of the day to do that. So therefore, like our contact hours with work in coming in contact with Portuguese are very reduced because we work in English every day. So really, the only time we get to practice Portuguese is when we go out to like a cafe or a restaurant or a bar, and then we speak in Portuguese and practice it there. But it's just, that's obviously not enough, and especially it's a limited vocabulary.
And even with that, the more and more that Portugal becomes popular with tourism and immigration, we're seeing a lot more English anyway on the streets. You hear it more. It used to just be like, really you'd hear, well, obviously Portuguese, and then Spanish was a lot, and then maybe a little bit of French. But now I just hear a lot more English for tourism mainly. So when you go to a restaurant, if they just hear you speaking English to each other as you walk in, then they just speak English. So you have to be very intentional about saying, you know, can we switch over to Portuguese? I want to practice, or I want the Portuguese menu. So that's also making it a little harder, is it's just easy to default to English, whereas you have to be intentional on the streets as well to learn Portuguese or practice Portuguese. Well, that's room for growth personally for us, but what about room for growth for the country? I think their efficiency is still really lacking. They still don't do enough digitally. I think that they're working on it and they're trying, but the problem is I don't know if it's just infrastructure or they just haven't been able to jump and make that leap, but I think that they really need to grow into digitalizing more and just being more efficient with things, as opposed to having a person doing like everything, having to print out so many papers, having to get it notarized. Like some of it is just a little antiquated. So I think a big room for growth for the country is the way that bureaucracy is.
Yeah, and this is not just on the immigration side. Like these are things that permeate all sorts of aspects of your life. You know, so even when we become citizens, we would still run into these bureaucratic things. Our Portuguese viewers know what we're mentioning here. I mean, there are things that even they have to confront that are bureaucratic, that don't have to deal with immigration, that are antiquated, like Kalie said.
That's 5 years for us in Portugal, and if you want to see how we applied for citizenship, then take a look at this video right here. And if you like stuff about moving abroad, then don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get moving.
Ciao.